I'm kind of curious. What was life like growing up during the Great Depression in Shady Valley?
Life growing up in Shady Valley was hard. It wasn't hard for me. I was an only child, and they petted me much too much. But my mother and dad, I can see them sitting at the kitchen table in my mind now, going over the budget. What could they do? And my father inherited the farm, but he also inherited taking care of my grandfather and my step grandmother. Well, my step grandmother decided she wanted to move to Bristol, so he had to take care of her in Bristol and her sister. And he also had to take care of my mother's brothers and my grandmother. And in those days, he was making $1 a day, and he was spending a nickel of it for transportation. Later on, when the Depression was over, and when this is not a political thing, but I will say it anyway, when FDR did his all of the work that he did toward taking care of people, WPA and all that, my father got a good job, and from there things improved, and he ended up as a director on the little bank in Damascus, and he did all right. Things were fine later on. But in those early days, I remember a friend came over from Bristol and brought her little son, who was all dressed up fit to kill. She was a secretary and making money. He had his little white suit on, and they wanted me to have my picture made with him, and I didn't want to because I had a pair of shoes that didn't have a buckle on them. And who wants to have a picture made by a fancy little boy coming over? And that is one of the main memories that I have. On the other hand, life was wonderful for me on the farm. It's a great place. It was a great place for me until I entered high school. When I entered high school and had to ride a bus across the mountain, I knew then and there that I couldn't be in plays. I couldn't do this, that, and the other, Glee Club and so forth. So my mother and dad let me they found a place for me to stay over here, paid rent, and for me or whatever, and I stayed here, and therefore I was in plays, and I was this, that, and the other, and those extracurricular activities meant more to me in my career than anything else, because that's when I learned to talk and learned to feel comfortable on the stage and all that sort of thing. I am 92 years old, so that goes back a long time. But I did grow up during the Depression, and we listened to the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night, and my mother said, Evelyn, you've got to remember there is more music in the world than the Grand Ole Opry. Well, I didn't pay much attention to that till I got to be in high school, and then Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby were the Bobby Sox generation. We loved it. And the war years with all the war songs and everything. It was a wonderful, wonderfully sad time, but wonderful. So anyway, I was a British Lit major, which we'll talk about later when we talk about Joe Wilson. I was a British Lit major, and so I had to go to Britain. And the only way we could get there was to work overseas somehow. So my husband and I got jobs overseas, and we were there for 20 years. While there, we lived quite a while in Munich, and I went to the opera and loved the opera, particularly Wagner. And I decided that I must be insane because his two favorite people were King Ludwig, who was as mad as a hatter, and the other one was I've forgotten his name now, but anyway, there were two. Hitler. Oh, Hitler was one. Hitler was the third one, who loved Wagnerian music. So I decided I must be mad, but I loved it. So I came back to America, and I came into contact with Minnie Miller and all of the music of this county. And I said, Minnie, I don't want to sound snobbish, but I don't like country music. It's just not for me. It's whang, whang, whang. And she said, Evelyn, it's in your blood. You just wait. Well, Barter Theater did that wonderful, wonderful play where Eugene Wolfe played A.P. Carter, and it was marvelous, Keep on the Sunny Side. I fell madly in love with the Carters. I saw it 6 times and cried every time. And each time I would say, I'm not going to cry this time, but each time I would cry when he played Are You Lonesome Tonight, or when they played Will the Circle Be Unbroken. I couldn't stand it. So I decided then and there that it might not be so bad. So Christy did the unveiling of of her first mural, and Lois had a little thing out of her restaurant. So we all went out. I went out thinking that I was going to say, Christy, well done, because I hardly knew her then. Have a glass of punch and go home. We closed up the place that night. Joe Wilson was there. All of these old musicians were there. I can't remember all of them, but anyway, there were a bunch of musicians there. And they sat and told stories. They would tell a story, and then they would play a song. Then they would tell a story, and then play a song. I came home that night, and I wrote 16 scripts about doing that on the Heritage Hall stage. What can we do? This is wonderful. And so I thought, I've got to find somebody. So Christy Dunn came to mind. So I asked Christy if we could have coffee, and I told her what I was thinking about, and she was wild about the idea. So Christy and I got a little group together, and that's how Long Journey Home was born. And that's when I really got knee-deep into country music and into our heritage, which is so strong in Johnson County. So I had 3 or 4 ideas that I thought were important. One was the whole business of country music and giving these people their place in the sun. And the other, I didn't know who G.B. Grayson was, as I told you before, until a student of mine did a report on G.B. Grayson. They called him Blind Bandman Grayson. And so I thought, if we could do something, some kind of a program, it would get those people in the forefront again, and it would also make our kids growing up proud to be Johnson Countyans. They would be proud to know what their heritage is made of. And I think that we are slowly getting there. I think we have made some progress on that. So that is basically how I came around 100 degrees back to the music of my roots.